how's your day going aside from, interview questions where they ask you the same things that you've been asked like 15 times before?
Going pretty good. Busy. A busy day with different production work. I do some television production work for
Sure.
an outlet here in New York. So uh, I was just doing some audio work for that.
That outlet, which has kindly run probably 150 episodes of the Paltrocast. So thank you for what your team does out there. Simple as that.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. That's right. You guys are airing on one of the channels. That's cool. Yeah.
Exactly. But hey, we're not talking about the Paltrocast. We're talking about top of the world. So already great reviews. You've done a full press cycle and a half on the whole thing. When did you actually finish the album?
Oh man. I think I probably finished it in late 2023, actually. Um, but you know how these things go in terms of the business side of things. Once the
Sure.
record was mastered and completed, then I was kind of looking for a home for it in terms of a label. So that always takes a little bit of time. Uh, I ended up with, oddly enough, the label that put out my first two records.
Right.
Um,
Parasol.
so
Yeah.
Parasol Records, right? I've had a really good relationship with them over the years, even beyond the records. Just keeping in touch, and there's obviously business royalty matters and such. So we just kind of kept in touch and over that stuff. And I mentioned to the owner, Jeff Merritt, shout out to Jeff, that I had this new record, and they were kind of interested in putting their toe back in the water. They, with all the streaming stuff going on, that their margins are so tight now. Especially really just for indie labels.
Right.
Maybe everybody really, but so they kind of put a pause on putting releases out. But then we discussed it, and he was kind of interested in getting back into it a bit. So I'm honored, man. They're a great indie label with a great history going back to the mid '90s. Put out a lot of great music by a lot of great artists.
Hmm.
So this is kind of like a reboot for them, a 2.0 kind of thing with this release. So I'm flattered and honored. It's been great so far. We've had a good time with it, and I think it's working out for everybody. So it's been a long road between the end of 2023 and, to answer your question, June, when this record came out a few months back, 2024. But it's all good, man. It's out there now.
Have you already started thinking about the follow-up record?
Yeah, a little bit. The wheels always start turning a little bit when I finish a record. You kind of forget about all the craziness that you went through to get it done. And it's I always liken it to it's fun, but at the same time it's almost like a cage match to see if you can wrestle uh the project into submission. I assume on a major label scale it's probably a little easier, although it's the same problems, just different different setting, I would say. But it's always hard to wrestle an album into submission
Hmm.
and get it out and into the world. So it's kind of stressful. It's fun, but it's kind of stressful. And then once the record starts to come out, you forget about all that stuff. And then you start thinking, oh, maybe I'll do that again right now. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm thinking about it, man. There's always songs floating around um, in my head and stuff that I'm working on here and there. So there's new songs coming all the time. So yeah, I'm thinking about it already. I don't know if I'm gonna pull the trigger right away. Might not do that right now, but it's in the works.
But looking at the literal background behind you, and you go, there's the keyboards, and there's the bass, and there's the guitar collection, and
Yeah.
there's the speakers, and there's the drum kit. You know, you are not in the situation that a lot of artists are in where they go, how am I going to find the time or the resources to get into the studio? So you have a different set of problems than your average artist, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably all share the similar problems, but yeah, in terms of this setup, I have my own setup here, which I've had this space since 2013,
Mhm.
and it dates back to when I was doing more freelance work uh,
Mhm.
in the music world. So this was sort of my own little private workshop facility that I built this from the ground up. Really, I didn't do it. I had consultants and contractors to do it.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, I have a cool little place to work, which is nice. And I have friends and co-producers that I've worked with that have similar setups. So we don't really go into big commercial studios, unfortunately, as much as we'd like or we used to. I did it probably, I don't know. I think I did it maybe once for this record. To be honest, the rest of the record was made in people's project studios or private
Mhm.
studios or even home studios and things like that. So um, yeah, I don't have that issue. I guess at this point in my life, I kind of have that sussed out in terms of having a place to work. But everything else is the same, you know, budgets, time. For me, it's time. My
Mhm.
biggest problem at this point in my life is time, as people may have gathered from the 14 years between my last record and this new one. Yeah, just a lot of different things in terms of uh, work outside of making my own music, whether that's television production work or audio work, or things like that. I have a family, a wife, a kid. Um, I have a 93-year-old mom who's unfortunately failing, and I'm sort of overseeing her whole life at this point in her care, which is almost like a secondary full-time job if
Right.
you want to look at it that way. So yeah, that's my problem. My problem is bandwidth, man. My problem is time uh, to do stuff for myself. That's really it. But it's not tied to place or money. I mean, at this point, I've made so many indie records. I know how to even. We all kind of learn this as we go. We learn how to make records on the cheap. So that's not even an issue anymore because I've kind of figured that out. So just time for me, really.
But you accidentally stumbled into the career trajectory that everybody kind of wound up in. And by that I say you probably love a lot of the same artists that I do and
Oh,
listen
I think
to the
so.
same artists. When I hear your albums, I go, okay, there's the Randy Newman, the Harry Nilsson, and the Cheap Trick. Here's the Kiss, etc. I get it. But when we're talking about Kiss, yes, they branched off into being like these business entrepreneurs, but probably that came out of the fact that their records stopped selling in the early 80s and they went, how do we keep the lights on? Because they had
Right.
some lean years. And Harry Nilsson's another person. It got lean, so he had to start scoring for commercials and all that kind of stuff. And he did start off writing for other artists. Maybe that's not the best example, but a lot of our favorite major label artists of the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, when you look at what they do nowadays in music, sometimes they're touring with that act, sometimes they're writing for other people, sometimes they're producing, sometimes they're a sideman, sometimes they're producing podcasts or doing audio mix stuff on the side, meaning no one seems to have one job anymore except the top 1% of music people. So that's your path. It was out of necessity, but everyone's doing that now. That's the long-winded response.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely hitting it 100% on the head, man. I have a son. He's 19 now. He's a drummer, plays a bunch of instruments really, but his main instrument is drums. And he actually played on the first song in this new record, Kaylee Hughes. That's him on drums.
Cool.
A few years back, it was just, I think it was almost 17. It was like the last couple of months of him being 16 that he played on that track. Goes to show you how long their album took to make again. But yeah, man, I agree with you. I tell my son, it's like it's just exactly how you describe it now. I said in terms of the working musicians, most of them that I know are very diversified, and
Yeah.
I think you hit it 100% on the head. I've had to do that over the past 20 years as well. I've had my hand in so many things. I've done music for commercials, some music for TV and film. I've written on the journalistic side. I've written songwriting columns for Guitar World and
Yeah.
Sonic Scoop and things like that. And then I've also, and I still do a little bit, I still teach songwriting and production to some students as kind of a holdover from those days. And it's just, you make your own music, you work on other people's music, you do work. I've been working, like I said, in television and audio. So yeah, man, it's just, that's the way of the world now. I think for, like you said, most working musicians and most working musicians that I know, pretty diversified. They just kind of have to be, like you said, out of necessity. Unless you're Taylor Swift or somebody who can just be Taylor Swift.
Yeah, I think, did we first connect because of Mike Viola? I'm trying to think on that. And
I think there might have been something around Mike that you and I connected. It's been a while, man, to be honest. I it might have been that, or it might have been Danny and Dan from the
oh
Giants.
yeah, from They Might Be
It
well,
might have been all three. It might have been all three of those things, right? Because you were working with management, right? With, I think, at that point,
yeah.
right?
So those
Working
are
with
three
Jamie or something.
artists that are also like, they used to be major label guys. You look at Dan and Danny, who were in Lincoln, which
Right.
didn't go where it was supposed to, and then they joined They Might Be Giants as sidemen, but then they're scoring for commercials and playing with other people. And then Mike Viola, he loses his Candy Butchers record deal. What am I going to do? I'll go indie. No, I'll write hits for people. No, I'll do A&R, a record company. So it's just very few people that are able to just be a career artist. Like it's Richie Blackmore and McCartney, and
Right.
that's about it.
Yeah, those old school guys, man, they got in at the right time. I think all the people that you mentioned, and I'm all, we all know each other and we're friends. Uh, we've all, I think, came up in that generation. I think we're all the folks you mentioned, like Dan and Danny and Mike, there and myself, we're all kind of Gen X guys. I think, I would assume, or I'd like to think anyway, that if we were probably born 10 or 15 years earlier than we were, I think we probably all would have had something cooking beyond the indie world. I think, the chances of us getting signed to like Warner Brothers in the 70s or 80s, when they were willing to take chances on guys like us, and they had other big acts to kind of fund everything. Um, I think if we would have hit it a generation earlier, I think maybe things would have been slightly different. But yeah, like you said, I think for the generation of musicians like us, it's again back to diversifying. Um, and the trick is to try to balance all that while still trying to have some semblance of a life and trying to put out your own music. Danny does it with
Mm-hmm.
his family music, and Mike still does it, going strong with his solo work, and Dan Miller does the television and film stuff. So yeah, I mean, that's the balance, man. If you can get both of those going, and still keep your own career going, I think that's really the way most people do it, unless you're super lucky, or you're a Nepo baby or something like that, which I find in music, even in my generation, there's a lot of those floating around.
For sure. Well, I
But
read something yet to rudely interrupt you, Mark.
no, no, please.
I read something yesterday that horrified me about 60s artists. Did you see the Bill Wyman interview that came out about just how destitute the Stones, except Mick and Keith, were?
No, I have not seen that, but I have heard stories. But I have to check that out. Where was that? That was
I can't remember. It just
okay.
wound up in the Google feed, and it
Yes,
was
yes.
probably like Blabbermouth copied it from an American songwriter thing, which copied it from
Sure, sure.
probably one of those things. But where I'm going is, it seems like the grass is always greener in music. That
Mhm.
people are usually talking up how successful and great they are until the bankruptcy filing happens. Then they have to flip the coin and be like, do you know how bad it was? And then that's part of the career arc to regain their assets to then actually get wealthy.
Yeah, it's like the Who, like with John
Yes.
Entwistle, God rest his soul, man. Like I remember hearing stories or seeing Pete Townsend or reading about Pete, and and Roger talking about in the press that they did so many reunion tours towards the end. Well, they're still out there doing it, but towards the end of John's life, because John needed the cash.
Yeah.
Pete had the songwriting, and I guess Roger had some of the songwriting publishing to a certain extent, but John didn't have that. So I could see that for the other Stones too, because the thread there is the songwriters, Mick and Keith, the Glimmer Twins songwriting pair there, as opposed, and the same with Pete Townsend and Roger Daltrey. If the guys who are in the band, these old school guys who were just the bass player or something like Wyman, and of course their contributions are invaluable, they're great players and amazing talents, but those guys didn't benefit from the publishing money, and they lived back then, they all lived exorbitant lifestyles, mansions and such. So these guys cruise on into the 90s and the early aughts, and they're like, hey man, we're broke. Let's get back on the road and do that 15 millionth reunion tour so we can put some cash in the pockets. So I guess you're right, no one's really immune. I think a lot of those guys were also a little reckless too. I mean, I think if they probably, I find it hard to believe that somebody in the Who didn't have enough money in their pocket from all those record sales back in the day. That's just people who are like, or the Stones, those people are just spending. Now you got to be a little smarter about things.
Before I ask you the last thing about yourself, I've read what you just said about Entwistle, about Fleetwood Mac. A lot of their regroupings were, hey, let's get Mick back on his feet and do another 100 shows. It makes you wonder how many of our favorite bands, 3/4 or 4/5 of the band, did not want to do it, but they just had their soft spot for that one member over the years. Is like, who was that one reckless person in each of those bands that was still likable, and is why they never stopped? Like,
I think
that guy in sticks.
Yeah, I think the way you describe it is probably 100% true. I think people are just very loyal to their friends, as they should be, and they have the means to do it. And I guess it's somewhat of a good time, although I don't know really how much of a good time it is to be out slagging it out on the road when you're 75, playing songs played 1 billion times. Yeah.
No, when I've spotted like Peter Criss out at shows, and you see him like struggle with steps, and you're like, that is just one flight of steps. How many flights of steps do you have to deal with when you're dealing with airports and hotels and venues and on and off a bus and all that? And then my heart really goes out to all these older artists. Like, even if they have a 6-pack like Roger Daltrey weirdly has at almost 80 years old, you go like, that travel has gotta suck. No matter how much you're getting paid rather. How can anyone's you were not meant to do that after the
No, certainly not. And I think it is the people, and I think you can kind of picture them. You could kind of figure it out. Like you said, I'm an old school Kiss fan. Kiss was seeing Kiss on TV in the mid '70s was probably my version of seeing the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. So they kind of kicked off the music thing, I think, for me. But yeah, you see it like Ace and Peter in Kiss when you read the stories. And I think I read Paul's book. Take it for what it's worth. Everybody's perspective is different, but Queen's guys like myself, Gene and Paul, that is. You see it like the reckless guys, the guys who were living large, spending a lot of money, doing a lot of drugs, not the business minded, for better or worse, Gene or Paul, but those guys, those are the guys, man, and they had their shots, from what I heard, in terms of the reunion shows, to try to make their money again and again, and then something happens and they can't help themselves. I mean, it's tough, man. These old school rockers, man, God bless them, man. They came up in a different era. They spent money like water. They party like crazy. It's hard for them to it's hard for them to change, I think. But yeah, I think everything you describe is right. I think people just like get together just to help some of these guys out. I think it's pretty obvious most of the time who those guys are.
In Van Halen, I think it was Alex Van Halen because he had his divorces. And okay, let's get Alex back on his feet. But anyway, the
Yeah,
last Mark question here for you, and
sure.
I don't know if this gets a 2-second no or a 25-minute rant. Whichever one
Knowing
happens,
me, it'll
fine.
probably be long-winded, I'm sure.
Well, to bring back our old friend and comrade Mike Viola into the conversation, uh, when people would talk about power pop to Mike, he would cringe. He would hear that term and hate it. Like, that's not what I do. I hate that genre. I don't want to be associated with it. And then you find other singer songwriters who love that term because they just think of positive energy and fun. Where are you personally when it comes to power pop?
Well, I'll tell you right now, that's not going to be a 30-second answer. Um, yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I kind of remember that Mike had that vibe about it, and I think a lot of guys do. I totally feel their pain, and I get it, and I think I do have that to a certain extent. Um, I've had this conversation too with several of my friends who are musicians, and um, I think I've had this conversation with my friend Michael Shelley, who's done pop. He's sort of been lumped into the pop world, and he certainly does that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't feel um I'm not gonna say I'm gonna cringe about that. I don't have that much it doesn't put me off that much. I think there is a part of it that I do feel like, I don't know, I'm probably more than that genre. I think what happens to a lot of us, Mike and probably myself definitely, I think a lot of our first forays into recording and stuff and putting music out there and shows and stuff kind of gave the pop ultra melodic, let's call it, I like to call it like ultra melodic pop music in the Beatles, Beach Boys, McCartney-esque, uh, like you said, Nilsson Newman style, just uh, just short melodic hooky pop tunes in the classic sense, meaning 60s, 70s. So I think when we started out in the mid to late 90s, uh, there was a bit of an interest and a resurgence in that, I think, going on.
Probably
And
Jellyfish.
yeah, yeah. And even to on a bigger level, even somebody like Weezer or somebody who was very melodic and poppy, they were a little heavier, so they weren't, I don't know how much power pop stuff they got thrown at them, but they probably did. So I think that was kind of bubbling around when we started, and I think a lot of our initial records, mine for certain, my first record, Pop Job the Long Player, I mean, right, it's in the title, you know, it's like, um, it sounds like a power poppy kind of thing. Now, is that what all that I am?
No,
No, I don't think so. But when you're starting out and people hear this stuff, um, they want to categorize you and kind of throw you into a box, and you know it's kind of what we do musically these days. So I think I just got lumped into that world, and a lot of the power pop fans really embraced my first record and my second record and beyond, and even up until this day. So I don't really knock it, man. I feel like, yes, is there more to me than that? Yeah, I think so. And I think it's been more evident probably on my last two records, Queen's English and this new one,
mhm.
Top of the World. Um, I think there's more to me than that. And but I'm not against it, man. To be honest, I embrace those fans. I appreciate the support and attention from the power pop world because I think it is a part of what I do. It's maybe not the whole ball of wax, so to speak, but it is a part of what I do. And I'm not going to say that it isn't. And I do take a little heat for it sometimes. You know, sometimes I hear people say, "Hey, man, when are you going to make that other pop? When are you going to make Pop Job 2?" But I just see it as a big wide tent, the pop thing, and I always try to defend myself and say, well, look, the Beatles made the White Album, right? If the Beatles are the top of the top, which I think we all in that world kind of agree that they are,
Yeah.
they made the White Album, They on the White Album, right, you have like Honey Pie, just like an English music hall kind of sound. You have Rocky Raccoon, almost like a country swing. Um, Good Night, orchestration. You know, on and on. You've heavier rock stuff. So to me, that's all under the umbrella, the pop umbrella, and that's where I kind of want to be. With the through line being ultra melodic songs that are short and hooky. So to me, that's what it is. If you want to call it power pop or you don't want to call it power pop, it's cool, man. I don't care, but I appreciate the support from all those folks. So I can't. It doesn't make me cringe as much. I'm not against it per se.
Great answer. I appreciate the analysis. And to sum up what I've learned, you are thinking about another record. This is not your last album.
I
You
hope not.
are simultaneously juggling a lot of musical and non-musical projects. So the fact that your albums take a little bit of time, it's not because you're making your own Chinese democracy, Axl Rose
There's a
style.
little bit of that too. I must confess.
Oh,
There's a little,
really?
yeah. There's a little
So,
bit of perfectionism and a little bit of obsessive compulsive vibes. But yeah, that's
oh,
part of it.
but then your son is on your record, so the musical family is continuing. You're still a Queens guy, so there's still great stuff coming up, whether or not it's power pop. That's what I've learned today.
Yep, yep. I think that's fair to say, man. I think so. Hopefully, that's the
Well,
case.
thank you for your time. Looking forward to what's to come musically and so forth. Thank you, Mark.
Hey, man, thank you for having me again. I really appreciate it.
Paltrocast.